Good afternoon. Welcome to this session where we're looking at, the focus of this session is looking at co-production and patient and public involvement and its benefits and impact in relation to health data research and health data science. My name is Maisie McKenzie, and I'm really pleased to be one of the co-chairs of this session this afternoon. I am a representative from an organisation called Use My Data, and the organisation focuses very much on the importance of the patient voice in how data is used in health data research and other forms of research, including clinical and academic research. Just for background, I've been a carer for many years, a carer for people, my family members with long-term conditions, and also have been involved in health data research myself. For me, I think it's really important we're having a conversation talking about co-production and public and patient involvement in health data research for a number of reasons. I think the whole importance of co-production, patient and public involvement in health data research is for many key reasons, which are really important for me, which include the issue of having conversation with a range of diverse voices to get their different opinions, different ideas, different questions, not always the answers, on a whole range of issues that impact on the health outcomes of individuals and hopefully helps to tackle health inequalities. These conversations can help with these main themes and streams which are important to me, which are around trust, transparency, openness, and on how data is used. Having these voices around, having these conversations around these key issues in relation to health data research really help to bring that openness and trustworthy, particularly with the stakeholders who are patients and the public, in how data is used, especially when they know the data is talking about things that will improve their health. I'm always reminded of a conversation I had, or something I heard from someone called Pete Westone, who is the chair of a HDR UK's data hub, who talked about the fact that behind every data point, there is a person, there is a story, there is someone with a health condition that wants you, that's entrusted you with their data to do something positive about that. But we're also reminded that sometimes the way health data is transcribed or translated can also have an adverse effect on individuals' lives. So we have to be mindful of that. There's a whole thing about the theories around mass destruction and how data and algorithms can have a bias impact on communities. I won't talk any more about this because we've got a field of really great experts who are going to be presenting on the work they've been doing around the importance of health data in their research, the impact that can have. But I'm also sharing the presentation and the chairing with Natalie Banham, who's from an organisation called Understanding My Data, Health Data, and she'll be also going to kick off this session by also giving her perspective on the importance of this really key issue. Natalie.
Maisie, thanks very much indeed. Real pleasure to be co-chairing this with you today. So as Maisie said, my name is Natalie Banner. I lead an initiative called Understanding Patient Data, which is based at Wellcome. And our aim is to try and make the way that health records are used a little bit more visible to people, more understandable, and crucially more trustworthy, because data is a difficult, complex, jargon-filled technical topic. Often people don't realise that information about them that's held within their health records could be used for purposes beyond their care. And to our mind, this is actually a very important thing. It's something that, you know, people can get very passionate and engaged about, but also there's an atmosphere of fear around it because a lot of people don't necessarily know that information in their data is used in these ways. It can generate a lot of anxiety, a lot of concern. And so we try to create resources, undertake attitudes and engagement research, and channel those insights into policy and practice to say that for those who are holding data and managing data and using it, how are you going to be worthy of the trust you're asking people to place in you when it comes to the use of their health data? So that's a little background to understanding patient data. I'm really pleased to be part of this conversation, particularly today, because it feels as though for once, health data is in the news. There's been an awful lot of discussion recently, a lot of media, a lot of criticism and critique about the use of health data. We had the launch of the GP DPR program, the General Practice Data for Planning and Research, that I think it's fair to say has not exactly gone smoothly. There's been a lot of pushback and backlash because there's a lack of clarity over who's accessing what data, under what circumstances, and why. And we've seen very legitimate questions and concerns arise from a huge range of different members of the public and Parliament and the media about exactly what's happening to people's health data. And today as well, we've seen the launch of a data strategy from the Department for Health and Social Care and NHSX, and that's come out. That came out yesterday, and that's very much geared toward innovating with health data and trying to get the best out of the data that we're collecting in the health service. But of course, that has to be accompanied by making sure that systems are robust, are trustworthy, that people can engage and be involved in decisions about how that data is used. Because of course, fundamentally, a lot of this data comes from people, and people have a stake in how it's used. And from the research we've done, it comes through time and time again. People want to know, but they also want to be involved. They think that's actually, this isn't something that should just be decided behind closed doors. There is a strong appetite for wider public involvement and engagement about making decisions on data use. So really looking forward to the discussion today and can't wait to get kicked off. So we have a brilliant panel with us, and what I'll do is I'll start off introducing the first speaker, ask them each to just introduce themselves, say a little bit about themselves, and then they're each going to talk us through some of their experiences of co-production and what it means to them. So I'll start off handing over to Ami Banerjee. Ami, over to you.
Natalie, many thanks, and thank you, Maisie. My name's Ami Banerjee. I'm a cardiologist and also associate professor in clinical data science at University College London and 2 hospitals in London. You can see the UCL and Barts Health. I spend 30% of my time as a doctor seeing patients and putting in data about patients, talking to patients about the data, and the rest of the time either in research or teaching. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be talking about some work our team at UCL has been leading, working with others, about how people can quantify their risk of mortality during the pandemic. And this first framework here is about something known as the learning health system, which is a way of tying together 3 silos that exist in health data research. There's the science, which is what we as researchers are doing with data. There's evidence where that research might enter guidelines as guidance, and there's actually care in primary care, in secondary care, in social care, and so on. In science, the question that might be interesting is, what is my risk of dying during the pandemic as an individual? In terms of evidence, what are the guidelines for developing this kind of information? And in terms of care, it's the so what. How is this information useful in that individual's care? And I think it's important to conceptualize that patients and public are involved, should be involved in each of these steps. And there's the bad end, where we're not aware at all about patients and public and they're not involved. And there's the good end, which for those of you who are film lovers, you might have watched or heard of a film called Lorenzo's Oil, where actually it's the patients, their carers, and that community that's actually producing the questions and the drive for the research.
Ami, I think you've muted yourself.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Still wearing my L plates, clearly. So the top of the slide is familiar to all of us, unless you've been in a cocoon for the last 18 months, the timeline of the pandemic. And since early on, it was understood that age and underlying conditions put you at risk of dying or of severe COVID. And risk scores very quickly emerged. So I've highlighted two from the UK here, the ISARIC score for hospital mortality and the Q-COVID score, led by Julia Hippersley-Cox and team in Oxford, which was based on primary care data. And the red line in the middle there shows you the explosion of risk scores that were published in preprints and in the mainstream scientific literature. Over 60 in the first year. Of those, only 2 scores explicitly involved public and patients in their development and actually said how. That's in itself a bit of a sad indictment of the fact that this is affecting all of humanity, and yet we've not been involving patients and public in that risk prediction. We produced a model early on about excess deaths and predicting excess deaths that was published as a preprint in March. And that came about because a patient with heart failure asked me about their individual risk and why they were being asked to take extra precautions. And so I, from the outset, was very engaged in how we might do better at listening and hearing what patients and public wanted in the way of risk information. So we approached the HDR UK patient panel. 39 of the nearly 60 people who are in the panel got engaged and provided input on an initial prototype. And over the next few months, they gave us input into how we should develop our model. And we did this all virtually. So it's important to think, even in an emergency setting, even in a pandemic, you can do this. So to say that we can't do PPI or we didn't have time to do it doesn't wash, frankly. Next slide, please. Just briefly, to show you how we took on this input. Across the top here, we've got 3 buckets, if you like: information needs of patients, patient usability, and shared decision-making. And we had 2 stages, really. Our paper was published in the Lancet in May, and we wanted to release a risk calculator open to the public with that. And actually our patient panel said that this should be primarily focused on researchers and policymakers. It's not ready for the public. It needs more user testing and PPI. So they told us, for example, under the information needs, stick to a limited number of conditions to start with. Don't try and do all the 80 odd conditions that the government was listing. They said more information about potentially unintended consequences and so on. So we listened and released this. Our calculator had 340,000 hits in the first 24 hours, but we opened it with a disclaimer that this was primarily for researchers and policymakers. Over the following months, we kept developing it with the panel input, also having clinician and stakeholder engagement. And actually, we reached a stage in November of last year where, again, we were at the stage where we were wanting to move ahead, and the patient panel wanted us again to go for peer review. So that's what we have done. So I think the take-home message is involvement can be done, engagement and involvement of patients is a must. And it means sometimes as a researcher, as a scientist, listening to what you might not want to hear. So in this case, stuff that you want to put out and publish, and actually the patients and public putting the brakes on to develop it further, which is definitely key learning from my point of view. I would finish just with how far we've come in some ways, but how far we've still got to go. That we talk about William Osler as the father of modern medicine. In the late 1800s, he talked about listening to the patient. He's trying to tell you what's the matter with them. But it wasn't until 2011, really, that the King's Fund produced a shared decision-making report where Angela Coulter became famous with the quote, "Nothing or no decision about me without me." And I'm only aware of, in 2019, the quote, "Nothing about me without me, nothing using my data without me," by Harlan Krumholtz, a cardiology professor from Yale, said this at a conference in relation to PPI. And clearly, I think we still have a long way to go to make sure that researchers are aware and trained, and also this is part of the culture that this needs to happen, because as has already been said, behind each data point is a person. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amy, for that fantastic presentation. And I think I'm really pleased to hear how much you've sown patient and public involvement within your the work that you've done. And I'm sure I'm seeing the chat's really lighting up with a few questions on that. But I'll move swiftly on to our next presenter, who'll talk more about her work, which is Anna Alvarez. Hello. And she's is part of the Agile Lighthouse Squad lead at NHS Race.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for having me. So, yes, I am the clinical lead at the Agile Innovation Lighthouse in Test and Trace. And so I'm here to share how we collaborated with Health Data Research UK and AstraZeneca to use NHS Test and Trace data, the results of the COVID-19 tests to support recruitment into a clinical trial. So we got together to try and solve the technical and ethical and public perception, logistical and information governance issues of contacting people with a recent COVID-19 test. This was to support the TACL clinical study, and this is a phase 3 study of a monoclonal antibody to treat COVID, and is testing whether it reduces the severity of cases when those within 8 days of a confirmed infection. Initial recruitment to TACL failed to meet the required scale and pace, in large part due to the short time period between confirmed infection and the need to dose the trial participant. At the Test and Trace Lighthouse, we receive a daily data feed of COVID-19 cases that have tested positive in the last 24 to 48 hours and have completed their contact tracing journey. It was proposed to contact those who had ticked the consent box to be contacted again to share the TACL study option. A public consultation targeted at members of the public was designed to understand public perceptions on the proposed approach, whether it was deemed to be an ethical use of data, and to help shape practical aspects of the study design. The development of the survey was led by HDR UK's Public and Patient Involvement and Engagement team, together with public contributors and representatives from the Lighthouse and AstraZeneca. Through the consultation, we had 106 responses in around 5 days. The public told us that while they preferred emails and felt they were less intrusive than a phone call, respondents themselves also highlighted it could lead to delays and be missed. For this reason, the method chosen was calling cases to raise awareness of the study option, followed by an email with more information and a link to follow if the potential participant wanted to contact the study team. This follow-up email is what the public said was an issue around feeling pressure to say yes on a phone call, and also addressed the additional signposting and time to digest information on their own time, ideas and suggestions raised by the public too. In terms of addressing the public concern that came from the consultation around the worry about phone scams and not being a genuine call, the call script introduction mentioned the date in which individuals had been tested as a confidence building measure. Additionally, following input from the public, the follow-up email also suggests that if the individual is not comfortable clicking a link, they can search online and that they should be able to find out the right information about the TACL study in this way too. Speed was by design, with the Test and Trace Lighthouse receiving and contacting positive cases within the same day. In this way, the Lighthouse team were able to direct the study team to the study team potential participants who had shown an interest so they could be screened and dosed within the required time frame. 45% of those that contacted the study team from test and trace went all the way to recruitment, and there was a high level of suitable candidates at screening. The Lighthouse call handlers used a frequently asked questions document to answer questions during these phone calls, although for any additional details, potential participants were referred to the TACL study team. These 34 questions cover details of the study and individual participation on the TACL clinical trial. The PPIE reinforced the need to address areas such as aim of the study, eligibility, consent and withdrawal, travel to trial sites, details about the study, how long it would last and what it entails for participants, risks and reaction to treatment, type of compensation, follow-ups, trial sites location, use of data, and the role of AZ in this study. When we carried out further patient and public involvement to ensure the FAQs and the script were fit for purpose, the public contributors suggested adding the FAQs to the follow-up email, since people would be more likely to want to participate if they had more information. Public and patient involvement improved the study design, directly informing the call script and FAQs. And as a result of this work, enrolled participants were found to be well informed during the consent process, as noted by the coordinating site staff. Using near real-time NHS test and trace data helped to recruit patients to a trial led by a pharmaceutical company within a few days of diagnosis. This was the first time that in test and trace we supported recruitment into a clinical trial. So this collaboration and embedding public and patient input, ideas and feedback to develop a trustworthy recruitment process provided the safeguards required to carry out this work and help design the process. PPIE worked very well in the agile environment we work in and was done quickly in a way that didn't impact the speed at which we had the pilot ready to start. This project has truly demonstrated how PPIE can be adapted and be flexible to meet the project's needs while having clear benefits to the trial and therefore the treatment of COVID-19. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Anna. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback. Can we ask people to mute if you are not speaking? Thank you very much. Brilliant presentation, Anna. It's just fascinating to me how through doing that PPIE, you could just find some little tweaks that made a real difference to people's confidence. So, for example, the phone call where people might feel there could be a scam or they're not sure if it's legitimate, just saying, "Oh, this was the date you were tested." Small little measures like that it sounds like made a huge difference to the outcome. So, really great to hear. Thank you. So I'd like to now hand over to our final panelist, Margaret Grayson, who has a huge amount of experience as a patient advocate and has been heavily involved in this conference today. And Margaret, it'd be great to hear your thoughts and reflections on co-production. Thank you.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be here, Banerjee and Natalie, for just sharing your thoughts at the beginning, and how interesting to hear from Amy and Anna and the involvement that has happened during their studies and research. And when I really love the title of today, that fact, I don't know what it means to the rest of you who are joined into the study, but the fact that there's nothing about us without us. I'm Margaret, let me introduce myself. I have been, as a patient, involved in research for the past 11 years. In actual fact, this is my involvement birthday this week. And I am passionate. I'm passionate about research. I'm passionate about the use of data. And I'm also very passionate that there also needs to be that patient involvement, that co-production in the whole area of that. And what does that mean to me? I suppose really, could I say, it means to me a partnership. It means to me a collaboration. A partnership means that there's two-way talking. There's listening and there's talking. There's the process of what you bring as the researchers and the professionals, and there's the process of what I bring as that patient and public voice experience. We both bring value, but we work with a common aim, to use data, to use research that will be of benefit to patients and to the NHS. And that's why I'm excited about this topic being part of this conference today. It's not about telling me about your research. It's ensuring that I'm part of the decision-making process in looking at policy, at looking at strategy, at looking at decision-making, at looking at who is using and has access to that data. That is involvement, and that is co-production. But let me share just a few of the areas that I have been involved with over this past COVID era. Maybe that's the easiest way to put it. I think I've been involved in clinical research, I've been involved in basic science research, I've been involved in data research, and I think data science is a very complex area, not only just in the language you use, but perhaps also the fact that there's a great majority of data scientists who never see or have contact with their large number of participants whose data they are studying and analysing. And perhaps that makes a little bit of a gap between society and the data science. I remember a few years ago, a statistician phoned me up and asked to speak to me about what this involvement thing was, because they had to fill it in an application for funding. And I often remind him about it, and not name him, I often remind him about it over the years, because during the conversation he said, I was speaking to my mother this morning and I told her I was going to actually meet a patient, a real patient. And I think sometimes that's the perception that we have between us, that there's that disconnect that just needs to be broken down and taken away. Data is a very powerful word. Oh, we've heard of that. If you've been at any other sessions today, as I have, the power of data. Nobody in the population or in the public could feel but to have heard and known that four-letter word especially over these past 18 months. But what is it that any of us who are involved have been doing, have been able to do? When I was part of the public advisory board within HDR UK, there was that opportunity to input to the SAGE report on a weekly and then a 2-weekly basis, to bring that patient and public voice, to look at what our priorities were, to highlight what we thought needed to be added to and have an input to that. About, I always go to say their matchmaking service, but I mean their matching service, how they brought in, when they were streamlining those COVID-19 applications and studies, how they were ensuring that at the very core and at the very base of that, there was public involvement. So that amazing, something like 600,000 people have taken part in those studies. How within being able to, you'll have heard perhaps earlier this morning, Professor Mark Lawler and many others talking about the impact on different services, different groups of people, and that is true within cancer. And I've had the opportunity to do many webinars with Mark as he presented those figures and that statistics, the importance that's shown them, but then having the opportunity to then translate that, to bring that in those patient, those real stories, the impact it has had on those who didn't go and be diagnosed, the impact who were in the middle of treatment, the impact like the rest of us who are living with and beyond cancer and concerned about, does anybody see us, do we have those CT scans? Being able to share those stories with policy makers and decision makers. But let me quickly share a very clear area of co-production over these months. Within the HDR UK family, within the Data Can Hub, it's fundamental, the principles of co-production right from the start. The principles and the principle of transparency that have been taken on board, the principle of transparency as developed by the Use My Data membership and by that movement, core to being part of any decision making within that whole Data Can Hub. The strength of the recruitment of 13 members to the patient and public involvement and engagement group. And I'm going to shorten that to PPIE because I couldn't say that all the time. We're 13 of us, a diverse group, different backgrounds, different areas. But one thing a passion in understanding the importance of data. The strength in that co-production has been that we have a PPI lead in Chris who believes that PPI is important. We have the coordinator, Emily, with a very strong chair to support us in Pete. Within that group, we've had to learn some language that you use in data science. We couldn't be part of sitting at decision-making groups if we didn't have that. And so there's been a whole learning program that is ongoing, a building up a library, not just for us to use, but for other people to use in this area as well. Within that DataCan hub, we have members in every subgroup, even the commercial group. And actually on the commercial group, we actually have a PPIE veto within that group. We're part of the management group. We're part of the steering board, making decisions, having a voting right within that. Why does it matter? Because the rest of the public has to trust what is happening with their data. They have to understand that there is part of that understanding and decision-making there. Data science moving at a fast pace, a massively fast pace. And I really believe that the public has to be brought along with that fast moving pace. With the announcement of things with like the new data strategy, the way things have been taken in the media, there has to be that transparency. There has to be that accountability. There has to be that governance within how data is used, how it's accessed, and more importantly, the benefit for you, for me, for the rest of the population. That has to be very clear. Data is precious. Maisie mentioned that earlier on when she spoke, because every number represents a person with a name, a family, and friends. I'm precious. I'm sure all of you think you're precious too. So be careful with how you use my data, but do use it. Be careful. Let me know what processes you have in place to keep me safe. And to underpin that, then ensure that at a table, you have people and patients, public, making those decisions, helping you form your policy, your strategy, being the voice to other people about using data. I'm just going to finish by saying thank you to all of the researchers who might be listening today, all the researchers that we heard about the papers that were published this morning. I want to say thank you for what you have done for us as a population over these past 18 months. Thank you. And if you're listening and involvement is new, or co-production is a new word to you, could I leave you with a challenge? When we're involved with you, we're not wanting to stop your research. In fact, we're the other way around. But we will challenge you. We will ask you questions. If you want excellence in health and social care, it's based on that data research. And there is no excellence without that involvement. I'm involved still after 11 years because of a passion, because I do believe that data saves lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I mean, fantastic words. And I can't really add to that, but certainly I think for all the researchers who are participating today, those are definitely words to reflect on and think about. So I'd like to kick off the discussion now and actually draw on something that both you, Margaret, and Maisie mentioned at the outset, which has triggered some certainly some good questions in the chat around diversity and hearing diverse voices and diverse viewpoints. How do you go about doing that? And it would be great to hear from all the panel on that. But may I start with Anna, because there's a particular question has come through around how does one ensure that the more sort of seldom heard populations are included in PPIE, and especially in relation to COVID and test and trace? Is there sort of a big problem with bias if you only can reach a sort of small sample of people? So what's your approach been to trying to engage and involve some of those more seldom heard communities for your program? And then it would be great to hear from Amy and Margaret as well on your thoughts.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I think it's a very critical one, isn't it? So obviously, you know, I suppose it's varying the methods and trying to reach out to these different communities and trying to use different networks as well, and trying to adapt to these needs, or you know, the different sort of preferences. And yeah, again, just trying to reach out, going to them rather than, you know, waiting on them coming to us.
Thank you. Ami, any reflections on ensuring diversity in the PPIE and how you can actually sort of more proactively go out and seek different perspectives and viewpoints?
Yeah, I think this is really important. And when we're recruiting PPI panels, I come across this both in clinical settings, patient involvement, but also in research, that it's very easy to have the easier to reach people overrepresented in those panels. And we do need to make sure that we do. I think as a researcher, actually admitting my limitations and asking for help is the way to do this. So the example I'd give you is pre-pandemic, I had a funded project looking at cardiovascular disease in the homeless population, and I sought help from colleagues who specialise in inclusion health and in research in homeless populations. And I ended up doing PPI via experts with lived experience, people who either were homeless or had been homeless themselves, which I wouldn't have been able to do unless I'd asked. So I think the key thing is to ask and not just plough on ahead and assume that you have done it right.
Thanks. Margaret, any reflections from your experience?
Yeah, I think it is an issue, and it is a problem, certainly within the DataCan, the 13 of us who are part of that group. We did a map out, and we have a reach to over 100, between us, to over 100 patient and research groups. So there's reaching out in that way, but I think it needs to be worked out. You take something like One London, who brought sort of people in who wouldn't normally be going to talk about data or even have an understanding of what data is. And I think it's maybe working with groups in their own community, so that there's an understanding that this is their data, what is being done with it, and that they can have a say within it. It is a work to be done, an ongoing work. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll bounce to my co-chair, Maisie. For the next question.
And I like those. I like the answers to that question, but I like the question in itself. And I've done a lot of work with another PPI representative, a lady called Della Ogunlewi, and she talks a lot about the fact it's really important to make sure when we're engaging patients and populations from different communities, they see themselves not only in the research, what the research is about, the topic area, the points at which they can influence, but also in the staff that are going out, that are engaging, that are meeting people. So if people don't see themselves in that research, then they think, you know, is this for me? Is this going to be relevant for me? And as a member of Use My Data, I think it's really important, as you say, make sure we're representing everyone, because it's so very important. Lovely question. I have a second question, and I've just gone and lost it now, but it's really about what good looks like. So this goes to both of the presenters, really. What does good look like for you in patient public involvement and engagement in your pieces of research? And what has been the greatest impact patient and public involvement has had to your piece of research? If I could go first to Ami, first of all, if that's okay. And then we'll go to Margaret last, if that's all right, to round it up. So Ami, Anna, and then Margaret.
I think that's a challenging question. In risk prediction, which I presented on, we have lots of guidelines about how to develop scores and how to test them and how to roll them out. And we even have in those guidelines, successive guidelines said we need to do more PPI, but how to do that and what good looks like is notably absent. I think that we have to start with and finish with patients. I think it's not what does good look like. It almost needs to be so inbuilt into what we're doing that you don't even think about it. In the same way as you know, as a researcher, I'm used to thinking of a research question and then thinking of methods and testing it using data. In the same way, I'm thinking all the way through how I'm involving patients and you know, how I might not be being representative, what needs to change and so on.
Very helpful, thank you. Anna, your views on this one, please. Thank you.
So I think for me, the most important thing was that it actually happened, that we were able to do this at speed. So, you know, it didn't sort of impact on the getting the project ready to start, which sometimes could be seen as a constraint. So we were able to do this to suit the project in parts as well. So, you know, as the priorities changed, we were able to do different pieces. And I think that also, obviously, you know, the public response was great. So, you know, I was very, very pleased that this happened in this way, where we had a great response in a very short time, and, you know, it was done and embedded in the whole project.
Thank you. Margaret, your perspective.
I think it's a lovely question, Maisie, and I suppose what's good, when I sit with researchers or with a body or an institution, whatever, and I'm not an add-on at the table, as though I'm like, oh my goodness, we have a patient in the room, but simply as just being part of it. I mean, I am not, when I sit with data people, I'm not a professional within data science. I would never claim to be. They're the experts, okay? But I'm also an expert. If it's living with a certain disease, if it's knowing what public think, I bring my expertise to that. And I firmly believe that when you mix them both, then the expertise that comes out the other end within the outcome for patients, public, and for researchers, then that is good. Not because I'm there, but because somebody else is there as well. Sorry, I don't mean that. So that didn't sound right, sorry.
No, I understand totally. Thank you so much. Natalie.
Thank you. Thanks, Maisie. So obviously we're in some fairly extraordinary times at the moment. The pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, has just swept across the globe. It's created, you know, obviously incredibly distressing situations for many people. But it's also shown up actually the potential and power of data to be able to help us understand the disease, understand the public health challenge, and formulate that the responses, you know, the research response, the public health response, and so on. So what impacts do you feel the COVID pandemic has had, or is having, or indeed could have, on co-production and on patient and public involvement, given that suddenly, you know, science and research and data are much more prominent in the public mind? Margaret, could I maybe start with you on this one?
Yeah, I think probably there's a massive way into this, because years ago, none of us we heard about data, but did anybody really care about it? But we've seen the research that has gone, you think the recovery trial. You couldn't fail to be a member of the public, but to know that. You couldn't fail to be a member of the public and not realize that the vaccine rollout has happened based within all of that data use and how even the rollout has happened. And I think that's a building block for bringing the public on board. But the very important bit is to have very clear understanding of why the data is used, how it is used, who uses it, and the outcome. We would be nowhere in any medical or any health setting without that data and that research. And if we say, my treatment is based on all of that data over the years. And I think that if that's made clear to members of the public, then we have a great starting block on being willing to share and use data.
Thanks, Margaret. And Anna, over to you. I mean, obviously the work that you've been doing is obviously very, very, closely tied into the pandemic with test and trace. But are you seeing this as a kind of one-off, the extent of the PPIE that you've done because of the emergency situation, or do you think that it's, as Margaret says, part of sort of a building block of maybe doing things slightly differently in future?
Yeah, so I think we continue to work on public and patient engagement in the projects that we have forthcoming actually, but I think it's been quite a positive impact, and I think it will be sustained. So there is momentum, I think, in the public itself in terms of participation. I think it's been great, and you could see, even in a very short time, short notice, that they had a great response. So I think that will carry forward, and we got to use that momentum really. And also, like I said before, I think it's shown that even in this situation where we had to work really quickly, this could still be done. So yeah, I definitely believe it will carry on. It certainly has in our team and the work we're doing in test and trace.
Thanks, Anna. And Ami, your thoughts on this one?
I think there have been great advances in the last year. So just two examples would be the regular weekly releases of data from Office for National Statistics, ONS, which anybody can engage with and play with and try and explain. And HDR UK itself has been collating regularly data from different sources. However, it's sobering. You said, Natalie, that I think we should have a sense check about where we are right now in terms of the lack of trust and the misinformation about data use for research right now. That's a live debate, controversy, whatever you want to say. And I think we in the research community need to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And one of the ways to do that is more involvement and engagement. And just this morning, I've done a clinic where 2 patients who are with underlying conditions should have been vaccinated long ago have not been vaccinated. Both, there might be legitimate reasons not to, but both of these cases were misinformation. And so I think it's really important to not just pat ourselves on the back and think that the job is done and data saves lives and send Twitter threads. I think there's lots more that needs to be done going forward. And it's definitely beyond the pandemic that we need to be focusing on. Thanks,
Ami. Maisie, back over to you.
Well, we've had our 2-minute warning to say that this presentation or the workshop's coming to a close in a moment. But I just wanted to ask for each of you just to give me one key takeaway, very quick takeaway, to provide to the audience about what you feel the benefit of co-production is. Very brief, very quick before we wrap up. And can I start with Margaret? Oh, actually, could I start with Anna? And then we will end with Margaret, because I do like to end with Margaret. Not being biased, of course. Anna.
So for us, really, it's been how it's really helped to support or to guide us towards a new use of data, and I'd say that's the one key takeaway message.
Thank you. Muchas gracias, Ana. Ami.
I've had the experience in the last 12 months of being a patient participant in 2 research studies, so from the other side. And I think co-production can actually give both the patients and the researchers probably more of a feeling of impact than you otherwise would have achieved.
Thank you. Great one. Margaret, over to you.
Just quickly, just that I think the co-production, if you hold and are working with my data and everybody else's data, you have to show us that you're trustworthy, and co-production is being part of showing trustworthiness. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's time to wrap up this panel, but I just want to thank our panelists very much indeed. It's been an incredibly stimulating discussion. As Margaret said, we are all precious and our data is precious. And I think the key takeaway for me is to be able to do this work well, it needs resource, it needs time and energy and expertise. This is not something that you can necessarily squeeze into a budget and do sort of half-heartedly. And I think it's really time to sort of be ambitious actually about what we want from patient and public involvement and co-production, and take that more seriously, because this will change research, and it will ensure that we're conducting research and using data in ways that are going to come back and benefit patients, the public, the health system, and everyone. So let's be ambitious and remember that, as Margaret says, we're all precious. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, everyone. Thank you to my fellow panelists and indeed my fantastic co-chair Maisie, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.